Access is what they call a relational database. A relational database creates relationships between tables in a logical order. For example, at the moment we have 3 tables, and I can easily print out information regarding customers from this table, TBL customer, and I can print out information regarding employees from this table and information regarding calls from this table. But there will come a point in time where I need to be able to print out all the calls made by a certain customer and handled by a certain employee. So I need to create relationships between these tables. In order to view and to manage relationships, go to the Database Tools tab in the ribbon, and from there you'll find a Relationships button, and click this. Because we created combo boxes using the lookup wizard between the call table and the employee table and the call table and the customer table, there are actually relationships between these tables already. So let's look at these in a bit more detail. First of all, I like to arrange my tables and size my tables in a way that I can easily view things. So I'm going to move the customers table down a little bit just by grabbing it by its title, and I'm going to drag the bottom edge of this table and stretch it so I can see everything in the table. I'm then going to do the same to the employees table. I'll move it down and I'll resize it so I can clearly see everything in the table. And the same with the call table, just move it over a little bit and stretch it. And now I can clearly see the 3 tables in my database, the fields that exist in each table, and that there's a relationship between the customer ID in the customer table and the customer ID in the call table, and there's a relationship between the employee ID in the call table and the employee ID in the employee table. Also, the little keys tell me that customer ID is a primary key, employee ID is a primary key, and call ID is a primary key. Let's start by deleting the relationships and recreating them with a better understanding. I'm going to click the line that exists between the customer table and the call table. It's gone a little bit solid than it was before, and I'll press the delete key on my keyboard, or you can right click and delete as well. It asks me, do you want to permanently delete the relationship, and I'll click yes. I'll then break the relationship between these 2 tables by clicking the line and pressing the delete key and clicking yes. You don't relate every table to every table. You create some sort of logical path or road between the tables. For example, there is a relationship between customers and calls because customers place calls. What we do is we make sure that the 2 tables have a field in common. So the field in common between these 2 tables is the customer ID field. And that is because one customer potentially can make many calls to this organization. So when I was designing my tables, I identified each customer with a customer ID field. And then when I designed this table and I referred to a call being made on a certain date at a certain time, I referenced who the customer was that made that call. These 2 fields are in common. They're both the same data types. This is a text field and this is a text field. So as long as they're the same data type, then logically they contain the same data. You can relate these 2 tables by these fields. Now how you do that is you grab the customer ID from one table and you drop it on the customer ID in another table. When you do so, this wee window here pops up, and it's basically saying the table customer has a field called customer ID and the table call has a field called customer ID, and we can create a relationship between the 2 just by hitting the create button. Now a customer can place a call. I'd also like to create a relationship between the employee and the call, the employee who handled the call. So I drag employee ID and I drop it on employee ID. And I click create, and I've recreated the relationships. Now there are extra settings in there that I'd like to explore. Let's look at this relationship here first of all. I'm going to double click the relationship or the line between the table customer and the table call to bring this window back up. What I'd like to do is enforce referential integrity, so I tick this option and I click create, or OK I should say. When I enforce referential integrity, I can see these symbols. If these symbols don't appear in the case of this relationship, then enforce referential integrity hasn't been enabled. Enforce referential integrity is telling me that there's a 1 here and an infinite sign here. One customer can place many calls, so 1 to many. By enforcing referential integrity, it means that if I'm filling in a call and it happened on a certain date at a certain time, when I get to the point of saying who the customer was, then the enforced referential integrity will check that that reference has integrity and that that customer exists in this table. And if the customer doesn't exist in the table, the enforced bit means it won't let me put that customer in. So basically, if I receive a call, I need to choose the customer from the customer's table, and if they don't exist, then I have to establish the customer first, and then I can put a call in that was placed by that customer. It also means that if I delete the customer from this table here, it won't let me because there's related information in this table here. So this is the primary key, so this makes this the primary table. This is the related key, so this is the foreign or related table, and one customer can place many calls, and you can't have a customer referred in this table that doesn't exist in this table. Same over here. If I double click the relationship between these two tables and I enforce referential integrity and OK, it means that when I'm filling in a call in the related table and I go to refer to who the employee was that handled that call, the enforced referential integrity will insist that that reference to that employee has integrity and that that employee actually exists in this primary table. Otherwise, I won't be able to put the employee against that call because the employee doesn't exist. It also means I won't be able to delete the employee from this table if there's related information in the call table, because again, you'll be in a situation where you'll have a reference to an employee who doesn't exist, or you'll have a reference to a customer who doesn't exist. So I think enforced referential integrity is a good thing. Another option that was in that window, so I'm just going to double click this relationship between customer and call, is Cascade Update and Cascade Delete. If, for example, this customer ID, which is a text field, if I change that customer ID, I want it to flow through all the related fields and update the customer ID in the related tables. So that's where I choose Cascade Update. So if I change the customer ID here, it will flow through and update the customer ID here. So again, we don't end up with loose ends between these two tables, that we don't suddenly have a call made by a customer who doesn't exist because we've changed their customer ID. And Cascade Delete means that if I delete this customer from this table, I want it to cascade through all the related table and delete them from there as well. So I'll choose OK. And I might do the same with the employee and the call table relationship. If I double click this line, I can say if the employee ID changes, cascade through and update the related fields in other tables, and if the employee ID is deleted, cascade through the other tables and delete the employee ID. So this is entirely up to you as to whether you want it to do that or not. And OK. Now sometimes I want to print relationships and keep a record of them. So what you can do is you can click the Relationships Report button. When I do that, it creates a printout or a report that shows me the relationships in this database. And if I hit the Save button on the Quick Access toolbar, I'll be able to save this report as Relationships for Call Tracking 2 and click OK. And here I can see in my navigation pane I now have one report in my report section, which is this report here. And I can click the Close Print Preview to get out of the report and the Close button to completely close this report. And if I hit the Close button again, I'll close the relationships. Now the more relationships you see, the better, because it'll help demystify this entire topic. So what I want to do is I want to go back to the database called Northwind and look at its relationships, which is basically the first thing I do whenever I receive a database, is I go and look at the relationships to see how the database works. So if I go to the File tab in the ribbon and I go Open, actually I had it open recently, so if I go Open and I go to the desktop, I'm going to open up Northwind. When I open up Northwind and I want to look at its relationships, I go to the Database Tools tab in the ribbon and I click the Relationships button. And here's the relationships for this database. And this is why I go here straight away. When I go into a database's relationships, I can see how many tables are in the database, what's contained in each table, who the primary keys are with the use of the little key, and how this table is supposed to work. And the fact that I can see the one and the many symbols means that enforced referential integrity has been turned on. So let's have a look at this. When I look at the customers table, each customer in this database is identified by customer ID. And when an order is placed, there's a reference to who the customer was. So one customer can place many orders. Over here, I have a list of shippers, and they ship out the various orders. And one shipper can ship out many orders. Now this is a perfect case where the field is not the same name in two tables. The field that's related is called shipper ID in the shippers table, but called ship via in the orders table. They don't have to be the same name, but they do have to be the same data type. It has to be a text field to a text field, or a number field to a number field, or a number field to an auto number field, because an auto number really is a number. But I would actually encourage you to give them the same names, otherwise it gets a bit confusing. Now when I look over here at the employees table, I can see that this particular database identifies each employee with an employee ID. And looking at the referential integrity, one employee can place, or handle I should say, one employee can handle many orders. So one customer places many orders, one shipper ships out many orders, one employee handles many orders. Now let's go over here, suppliers. Each supplier is identified by a supplier ID, and that's a primary key. One supplier supplies many products. So when I put in the details about a product, I say who the supplier is. Over here, I have a table called categories. Each category has an ID. The categories are like seafood, beverages, condiments, things like that. So one category can have many products in it. So one category like seafood can have many products. One supplier can supply many products. Then there's this information here. Basically we have an order, but one order can have many details. So instead of having a single order form is actually two tables. We have the order number, but one order can have many details, and that one order can be for many products, and each with its own price, each with its own quantity, and each with its own discount. So the more you look at this, the better. If I double click the line between customers and orders, I can see referential integrity has been turned on and Cascade Update's been turned on. So that means to me that if this customer ID in this customers table changes, it will cascade through and update the customer ID in the orders table because of the Cascade Update. And the enforced referential integrity means that when I'm filling in an order and I refer to the customer who placed that order, it's going to check that that reference, i.e. that customer ID, actually exists in the customers table and that it has integrity. And if it doesn't exist, the enforced part means it will scream at me and not let me place an order for that customer until I've recorded that customer in the customers table. So I hope that makes sense. And cancel.